January 15th, 1919. Boston's North End. It's an unseasonably warm day, about 40 degrees. Children are playing in the streets. Workers are on their lunch break. And then a sound like machine gun fire rips through the air. It wasn't guns. It was the sound of a 50-foot-tall steel tank containing 2.3 million gallons of molasses tearing itself apart. What happened next was a nightmare in slow motion. A wave of molasses, 25 feet high and 160 feet wide, moving at 35 miles per hour, exploded into the streets. It demolished buildings, swept a train off its tracks, and swallowed everyone in its path. 21 people died. 150 were injured. They weren't just drowned. They were suffocated, crushed, and glued to the ground by a substance twice as thick as water. This wasn't a freak accident. It was a disaster waiting to happen. And the reason that tank was there in the first place was a secret tied to the most destructive war in human history. World War I. The United States is in the fight, and war in the industrial age runs on more than just bullets and bravery. It runs on chemistry. Molasses is a key strategic resource. When fermented, it produces industrial alcohol, which is then used to manufacture munitions, smokeless gunpowder, dynamite, and other explosives. The Purity Distilling Company, a subsidiary of United States Industrial Alcohol, USIA, built the massive tank in Boston's North End in 1915. For one reason, to feed the war machine. It was positioned right next to the harbor for easy transport. The war ended in November 1918, but the tank, still nearly full, remained, and it was fundamentally, fatally flawed. The tank was a ticking time bomb from day one. It was built hastily, with shoddy materials and incompetent oversight. The steel plates were too thin. The rivets were weak. It leaked so profusely that local children would bring buckets to collect the sweet syrup seeping from the seams. The company painted the tank brown to hide the constant oozing leaks. Residents complained. They knew it was unsafe. They called it the molasses jug. The company's response, they did nothing. Why? Because the war was over. The molasses inside was now destined for peacetime uses like rum production. It was just an asset on a balance sheet. Investing in safety was an unnecessary cost. They ignored basic physics. The warm day on January 15th caused the cold, thick molasses inside to expand, putting immense pressure on the already compromised structure. The tank didn't just leak, it vaporized. The force of the rupture was compared to a locomotive. The ground shook. The wave of molasses was not a slow, oozing flow. It was a tsunami of syrup, a wall of viscous energy that pulverized everything in its path. The Boston Post reported, molasses waist-deep covered the street and swirled and bubbled about the wreckage. Here and there struggled a form. Whether it was animal or human being was impossible to tell. Horses were stuck like flies on flypaper and had to be shot. Buildings were swept off their foundations. Rescue workers, police, and sailors from a nearby ship fought for hours, wading through the chest-deep muck, the air thick with the sickly sweet smell of decay. It took weeks to clean the streets. Boston Harbor would run brown for months. The city was traumatized. But the fight for justice was just beginning. And speaking of powerful, unstoppable forces, let's talk about the challenge of finding the right music. You're creating a documentary about this devastating disaster. You need a soundtrack that conveys impending doom, catastrophic release, and a long, grueling legal aftermath. But finding that music without copyright strikes can feel like trying to outrun a molasses wave. That's where Epidemic Sound comes in. It's a massive library of high-quality, royalty-free music and sound effects. No legal entanglements, no sticky situations, just unlimited access to thousands of tracks. From tense building drones to chaotic, disaster-themed scores. Need the sound of creaking metal and impending collapse? The somber tone of a community in mourning? They've got it. Their search tools make it easy to find the perfect sonic landscape for any story. Right now, Epidemic Sound is offering a free trial. Use the link in the description to soundtrack your content. Thanks to Epidemic Sound for sponsoring this deep dive into history. Now, back to the cleanup. What followed was one of the first major class action lawsuits in American history. Over 100 lawsuits were filed against USIA. The company fought back viciously. They blamed anarchists, claiming a bomb had blown up the tank. They blamed the unseasonably warm weather. They blamed anyone and anything but themselves. But the evidence was overwhelming. An MIT metallurgist testified that the steel was half as thick as it should have been and contained too little manganese, making it brittle. The architect who designed it had no engineering degree and hadn't even done basic stress calculations. The hearing took 6 years. In the end, the court found USIA entirely responsible. They were forced to pay the equivalent of tens of millions in today's dollars. The verdict was clear. Corporations could not place profit over public safety. So, what is the true legacy of the Great Molasses Flood? It's more than just a bizarre historical footnote. The revelation is this: the Molasses Flood was a direct consequence of wartime profiteering and corporate negligence, and it single-handedly created the modern system of industrial regulation. The disaster became the catalyst for a revolutionary legal and ethical shift. 1. The end of caveat emptor. The case established that a company had a profound responsibility to the public, not just its shareholders. It paved the way for modern liability law. 2. The birth of government oversight. In its wake, Massachusetts passed some of the country's toughest industrial safety and construction codes. These became the blueprints for national regulations, requiring that all engineering plans be signed off by licensed professionals and that materials be subject to independent inspection. 3. A blueprint for the New Deal. The philosophy that government must protect citizens from corporate malfeasance, cemented by this case, would become a cornerstone of FDR's New Deal a decade later, leading to the creation of federal agencies like the FDA and OSHA. The 2.3 million gallons of molasses weren't just a sweetener. They were the residue of a war economy, left to fester in a faulty tank. The flood exposed the brutal calculus of an industry that had valued munitions production over human life and was unwilling to spend a dime to clean up its mess. The wave was sticky and sweet, but the truth it revealed was brutally clear. Unchecked industrial power is a threat to public safety. And sometimes it takes a tragedy of bizarre and horrifying proportions to force a nation to build a wall of law to protect its people.